Let's quickly go on to our next session. Time to invite our next set of speakers, and this is From Strategy to Systems. And our distinguished panel, first up we have with us Mr. Curtis Estrin, former US Ambassador to the Asian Development Bank and currently Chair of Senior Fellows and Senior Advisor at the Milken Institute, Advancing Economic Development, ESG, as well as public-private collaboration across Asia and United States. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. I also noticed that yesterday you were a keen observer of all the sessions that were taking place. It's wonderful to have you on this side. I'd like to invite you as well to please come forward. Up next, I'd like to please invite Tarindu Jayatilaka Arundiga, Minister, Secretary of Agriculture Ministry, to please join in as well. If I could please invite you on stage. And if I could invite our next speaker as well. I've been informed he's not here. Okay, then let's move ahead to invite Mr. Michael Nalithambi, Principal Secretary for Investment, Entrepreneurship and Industry in the Republic of Seychelles, with decades of administrative experience shaping fisheries, investment promotion and enterprise development policies. I've also been told that the session is being spearheaded by Angela Chitrakar, but I've been told that we have with us DM Anuradha, or I've been told there is a replacement. Kamal. Okay, so we have Mr. Kamal. I'm so sorry, sir. I think there's been a slight shift in my script, but sir, if I could humbly invite you on stage to please join in, and if I could invite Angela Chitrakar as well, who's the founder and CEO of US-India Corridor, to please come on stage. If I could invite all of you to please come, take your seats. Well, slight mix-up in my script there, but that doesn't stop us from hearing from the leaders who've joined us over here. So I'm going to quickly hand it over to you and to take the session forward.
Okay, welcome. The panel that just wrapped up, you'll notice that there are emerging themes. Would you like to join? Come on. You'll notice that there are themes that are emerging in this conference. People-to-people ties. I loved what the gentleman had said about utilizing history, contemporary history, utilizing history and contemporary history. 5,000-year relationship between Gulf nations and India. Transparency, institutional building frameworks. So good morning and thank you very much for joining us. I am Angela Chitkara, founder of US-India Corridor and faculty at Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs. It is a privilege to moderate this inaugural plenary. Thank you to Priyam Gandhi Modi, otherwise known as PGM, and her team for organizing this thoughtful event and for their hospitality. It is beyond measure. I also would like to acknowledge this moment we're in. As we gather here in India, many around the world are marking Chinese New Year, Ash Wednesday, and the holy month of Ramadan. Different traditions, different calendars, shared humanity. And in the United States, we are reflecting on the passing of the Reverend Jesse Jackson, a civil rights leader who reminded us that dignity and inclusion must remain central to public life. These moments remind us that we live in an interconnected world shaped not only by trade and infrastructure, but by culture, faith, and people. So here we are in Mumbai. Mumbai is often called a maximum city and the city of dreams. It is a city that lives between worlds. That idea inspired me to start my own cross-border advisory firm many years ago. It is also the idea that underpins strategic corridors today. Mumbai has long been a gateway between India and the world. From 150 BC onward, India traded across the Persian Gulf and the Mediterranean. Rome reportedly, and I learned this yesterday, Rome reportedly spent nearly 50 million sesterces annually on Indian goods. Tariffs on those imports covered roughly 1/3 of Rome's military budget. So today we're reimagining these roots in a multipolar world, interdependent world through collaboration and trust. India and the European Union recently concluded what has been described as the mother of all trade deals, with bilateral goods trading at roughly $136 billion, with planning to expand to $200 billion. India and the United States have reached a historic interim trade agreement with goods trading near $129 billion. This is the economic architecture in which IMEC, India, Middle East, Europe corridor, is being designed. 40% reduction in time shipments from going from India to Europe. During last evening's dinner conversation, and again in the opening keynotes, I heard a phrase that stayed with me. Trust is the ability of countries, even though not always like-minded, to cooperate where interests align. That is resilience. It is also conflict resolution. So the question becomes, are we building connectivity or rebuilding trust? So I'd like to introduce my esteemed panelists. Curtis Chin, Chair of Asia Fellows at the Milken Institute, and former U.S. Ambassador to the Asian Development Bank, ADB. Kamal Madhushetty, Assistant Professor at Rishi Hood University and Visiting Fellow at the India Foundation. Michael Nalitambi, Principal Secretary in the Office of the President of the Republic of Seychelles with more than 3 decades of public service. Earlier this morning, I had a conversation with Gershom Sachs, Director of the N7 Initiative and former Director for Gulf Affairs at the National Security Council in Washington, D.C. He said that the U.S. is a key driver of IMEC. The Biden administration brought together India, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia to forge the concept in May 2023, leading to the corridor's launch at the G20 in India. And President Trump, in his first call with Prime Minister Modi in 2025, helped sustain it. So with U.S. leadership and convening power, the promise and potential of IMEC remains alive. A Sherpa process launched in August 2025, now with multiple working groups to advance all the essential elements of the corridor. Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither will this corridor. But its potential to transform the Middle East and international trade is vast and within reach. So Kamal, with the U.S. holding the G20 presidency this year, as well as efforts to advance the Gaza Board of Peace, ambitious diplomacy could lead to breakthroughs we have yet to realize. So this moment in time, with the India-Europe trade deal, the mother of all deals, U.S.-India trade deal, IMEC has been met with great fanfare and also challenges.
Thank you, Angela, and good morning to all of you. Thank you to all the organizers for having me. So, like you very rightly said, I think IMEC was an idea that came about during India's G20 presidency in September 2023. It was announced, like you rightly mentioned, with a lot of optimism and fanfare, and rightly so, because of the potential that it holds. I mean, if you look at the countries that were part of the initial announcement and the initial signatories, if I can call it that, you had the US also part of it, apart from, of course, India, the EU, Italy, France, then, of course, UAE and Saudi. And there was the initial framework also mentioned Israel as part of the corridor, right? So, and the potential is extraordinary. Because like you said, and the 40% number, which is the reduction in time when it comes to shipments moving from India to Europe, that is estimated, and this is famously said by the European Union President, Ursula von der Leyen. That's a lot, right? Like that is a lot that we're talking about. So, and the promise is also because of the geopolitical and national contexts of each of these countries that are involved. Globally, there is, it's a difficult time to trade, right? Trade tensions are the order of the day. And despite that, what you see is there is a certain optimism and push and potential that is identified when it comes to IMEC. The US President himself, Donald Trump, called IMEC one of the greatest trade routes in all of history. right? And this is coming from a president who is typically known to, advocate for America first, not so interested in, many other initiatives. So you see that there is a very strong national context as well in each of these countries. For India, it sort of allows it to bypass many other obstacles. It goes directly to Europe. It sort of takes you away from the risks that are around the Suez Canal and the Red Sea. For countries in the Gulf, Saudi, for example, mainly, it allows for diversifying its trade relationships, and it allows for Saudi to become the central piece in the economic sort of corridor, which again is both transport, it is digital, it is also energy, right? And Saudi has been trying to diversify its economy. And for Europe, of course, it allows for a very important trade route which can directly connect it to India, again taking away from all of these risks and detours in a sense. But it has faced very strong challenges, like you said, and that happened almost just a month after it was announced. And that started with the Israel-Hamas war. And that really has, in a sense, raised a lot of questions because if a lot of the main countries which are, the key sort of actors in making this a reality, if they are not politically in alignment with each other, that creates problems because the geopolitical logic of IMEC was sort of resting on some very significant advancements like the Abrahamic Accords, which preceded this. And after the Israel-Hamas war, that has sort of gone into the back burner. There are tensions between Saudi, and UAE as well in more recent times, and the normalization that we were hoping for between Saudi and Israel is sort of again on the back burner. So those are real and very difficult challenges to overcome. Apart from all the other challenges of handling fees that will increase because the shipments would go from water to land and then land to water again, right? So there are those challenges, but the key challenge is the political challenge, I think.
So it also, thank you. So it also, the development goals for each and every country sort of aligns with, it diversifies, right? Like for example, Saudi Arabia, it gives Saudi Arabia an opportunity to diversify, right?
Absolutely. I think Saudi has this Vision 2030 as part of which he wants to diversify its economy. For India, of course, India has been pushing trade deals. Like you said, the mother of trade deals is something that we've read about, seen in the last few weeks. But that's not the only trade deal. India has been signing a slew of trade deals in the last 2 to 3 years. More recently with Oman, with UK, and before that with UAE, with Australia. So there's a momentum that is building towards trade deals. But signing trade deals has to be complemented with, in a sense, trade routes. And when it comes to IMEC, it is not only the movement of goods that we are talking about. We're also talking about digital highways.
Right.
We're also talking about energy sort of pipelines. So it's a multi everything in a sense.
Okay, so let's continue with that, the digital highway and standard setting, right? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so I think because the importance of digital highways, especially for IMEC, becomes very salient also because a physical corridor which transports only physical goods may not be totally viable economically. So you add on these couple of layers of a digital highway, which means optical fiber networks, which also means the softer aspects of it. So one is, of course, when we look at digital highways, the optical fiber networks and the hard physical infrastructure. But the other is the softer digital infrastructure, the standards, because if we have, let's say, digital public infrastructure that India champions being more adopted through the region, it helps harmonize standards. And those standards becomes important because there's a lot of shifting that we are talking about. Like we are talking about goods changing hands, again, from maritime to land and land to this thing. So the harmonizing of standards would help reduce handling fees. It would help reduce, make payment systems easier. So the softer infrastructure also would sort of bring business communities and make business communities more compatible with each other in these intersections. So I think that is going to be important. And standard settings also in terms of the physical world, in terms of the railway lines, right? What are the standards that we're talking about? So yes, the political challenges can remain, but the nitty-gritties is something that needs a lot of work.
Okay, thank you. Curtis, I'd like to bring you in. So as former ambassador to the ADB, and given that you've spent quite a deal of time in Asia and you continue to, how do you, as you think about corridors, economic corridors, and IMEC, the Belt and Road Initiative, do you see it as a counterweight to IMEC?
Thank you, Angela, and thank you, Priyam. I was going to say to open, what a beautiful evening yesterday was, and why I particularly enjoyed it was it because it was also about history and civilizations. I'm in a world of economics, but when we talk about corridors, we also need to recognize the power of corridors to spread culture. I don't know if anyone's Buddhist, but Happy Losar, this is Tibetan New Year also. But through the Silk Road and other things, so much else spreads beyond economics. But all of our focus typically is on trade. ADB, what is the ADB? Some of you will know. Some won't. India is an important member of the Asian Development Bank, headquartered in the Philippines in Manila, where part of their effort is this notion of how do we increase regional integration? How do we increase, in some ways, economic corridors? But as was noted, corridors are much more than physical. Digital corridors, policy standards. And so when I think about the topic that we're talking about right now, the strategy is right. India's strategy is right. How do you integrate? How do you be more resilient by having different routes? You cannot be reliant on any one country, right, whether it's the US or China or for other countries or India. You have to be more resilient. So the ADB is trying to bring together countries. So I just met with the new head of the Asian Development Bank, and one of his ambitions is how does he himself increase the membership of the ADB to include the Middle East. So last year for the Milken Institute, I'm so delighted that actually some of you here I've seen at Milken events. Others even more delighted because that I know you will be seen at Milken events. So do talk to me later about that. But one thing the president of the ADB talked about is, can he get more engagement by non-members right now, like a Qatar, like a UAE, like a Saudi. And last year I was in Riyadh, Dubai, Abu Dhabi for Milken and other reasons. And in each place, someone from those nations said to me, don't forget, we are Asia too. Because sometimes there's a stereotype of the Middle East as its own thing, with all the good and bad stereotypes of violence, it's a, history. But they underscored the Middle East, particularly if peace can come, if the Abraham Accords can be expanded upon. They will be, if not already, they will be part of the dynamism that India is part of, which is Asia. And so when you look at the World Bank and IMF list of the top 10 economies in Asia, typically they include the Middle East. And there it's Saudi and the UAE. So this notion of corridors, first I would say, number one, it's a mindset. And each of our own nations, I may look totally Asian, but I'm kind of American. Each of us have our own mindset, good or bad. U.S. is typically very optimistic, sometimes arrogantly optimistic, I would say. But it's one traditionally of openness. So we talk about President Trump. We have a terrific new ambassador here. I don't know if you've met Ambassador Gore. But indeed, it's not like sometimes in some governments, one government throws out everything of the last government. So clearly, President Trump has recommitted to IMEC, to this notion of connectivity. So when I look at the ADB, sometimes they have this ambition, this strategy, increase connectivity, just like India, but sometimes where it doesn't play out is the execution and implementation, the creation of systems to make it real. So if I used to sit on the board of the Asian Development Bank looking at infrastructure projects in India and elsewhere. Usually, I think page 3 of a board document is a list of acronyms. And so my test for all of you would be, well, what is CTI? No one knows. It's the Coral Triangle Initiative. What is, I don't know, Bimpiaga? It's the Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines Economic Growth Area. I might go back to ADB and say, what is IMEC? Hopefully the India team knows, others might not. So there are all a whole dictionary of these things. BRI, before it was Built and Road Initiative, it had other kinds of acronyms. Oh, is that the New Silk Road? Is it One Belt, One Road, OBOR? But how do we move beyond those acronyms to create real systems? And so one of the challenges I see for IMEC is the ambition is good, but it involves so many countries of different economic status. So is it going to be a rush to the common denominator, which will be progress, but not the progress that other countries will want? So I'll close this first part by just saying what I'm seeing at ADB and elsewhere is the rise of always out of this multilateral world, the mini-laterals. So I'm based in Southeast Asia. Our big grouping, South Asia, you have SAARC. We have ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, which just added an amazing little country, Timor-Leste. But the Timor-Leste challenge, stunting, poverty, reconciliation, is so different than Singapore's challenge. We think about demographics. This year is I think the 25th anniversary of Jim O'Neill, Goldman Sachs economist, announcement of the BRIC, the power of the BRIC. Brazil, Russia, India, and China would kind of, take over the world. These were the countries. And they played out, as we all know, in different ways, not at the pace we'd like. And so whenever I travel, people will say to me, oh, how can this country, wherever I am, Malaysia, Thailand, be the next BRIC? And because I never want to offend my host, I will say, I worry about Thailand or whatever nation being the next BRIC. I worry about the little BRIC. And I would close by saying, well, what is the little BRIC? It's not a nation. It's bureaucracy, it's regulation, it's inequality, and it's corruption. And every nation, including the US, deals with these issues. So when we think about something like IMEC, to what degree will it be undercut by bureaucracy, regulation, inequality, and corruption as it moves forward, as they turn that strategy into a system?
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Michael, I'd like to bring you in to the discussion. You've been very patient, and welcome. So as we think about, IMEC, it does not formally include Seychelles, yet the Indian Ocean itself is a strategic corridor. Many know Seychelles for its beaches. Less understood is its role along major sea lanes, undersea cables, and digital infrastructure routes. So how does an island nation of just over, I think you said 100,000 people, balance tourism, climate vulnerability, and maritime security while navigating power dynamics?
Thank you, Angela. Good morning, everybody. And thank you for the organizers. Even for last night's event, it was enlightening. Maybe I should start with this little anecdote. When the elephants fight, the ants suffer. But even when they make love, the ants still suffer. So being a small island state, balancing our main economic activity in all the turmoil and positivity that happens becomes a challenge. But before I go on, let me just explain a bit of Seychelles. I am not too sure how much the audience knows of Seychelles. It's a small group of 115 islands situated in the middle of the Indian Ocean, about 1,800 kilometers from any closest continental shore. A population of just over 100,000, and with a landmass of 450 square kilometers. As I say, spread over 1.4 million square kilometers of ocean space. That means they are islands that are very well diverse and dispersed around ocean space. But in itself, managing the islands are quite a challenge. The basis of our tourism industry is really the environmental attributes of the country and the pristineness of the islands. Now, this in itself is a major challenge in the global climate issues that are undermining our ability to sustain the islands against climate threats, sea level rise, accelerated precipitation, and the like that cause flooding and erosion on our coastal areas. And by the way, Seychelles the population is situated over 3 main islands, which are granitic islands with high peaks and very narrow coastal areas. And these coastal areas is where most of the infrastructure, including our food security stores and whatnot, are based. So these, the climate effects threaten these coastal, even the tourism establishments are threatened by climate effects. So we are very conscious of the environment and have by law a requirement for every major development to happen, even a hotel, it having to go through an extensive environmental and social impact assessment before anything can be done. Now, whilst we do this internally to mitigate as much as possible the implications that our own development have on the environment, we remain heavily vulnerable to the global effects of environment. And therein we look at collaborations and understanding from our global partners to understand the implication and effects of their activities on the smaller vulnerable states, such as Seychelles. So it is that two-way street that we look at our partners and other players in the world to also help in mitigating environmental implications on us, as it has major existential issues towards the countries such as Seychelles.
Thank you, Michael. As a follow-up, you spoke about participation of Seychelles. Can you talk to us about that? About how are you reimagining Seychelles' involvement and participation?
Seychelles is quite a very open economy. We import almost 90% of anything that we consume. So we are very much open and have no choice, in fact. We are limited in land mass and limited in resources. So we depend a lot on on trade. And of course, tourism being another form of service traded in the ocean. If I try to relate the question to the IMEC corridor, whilst we are not party to the corridor itself, we do lie along that path, wherein the transaction, the activities around the corridor have implications on the island, the Seychelles. So whilst we may not be directly involved, we call on that understanding for the parties to understand, to look at the implication and impact of their activities along the corridor on the island, the Seychelles, so that maybe we should be part of the discussions, not as simple observers or recipients of whether positive or negative impact, but to be part of the discussions in the design of what happens, so that we can help mitigate the implications of whatever happens in this country. Thank you.
We talked about DPI also yesterday. So how can corridor participation translate into meaningful jobs?
One of the speakers yesterday mentioned one of the DPIs, the UPI, in fact, the
Right.
Unified Payment Infrastructure.
Right.
One of our concerns is we, as I said, trade and therefore have major external transactions where we pay in currencies and we use the Visa card and all this, where our payments have heavy charges, external fees. What I understood from the UPI, it offers an opportunity where you become more independent, a country may become more independent, and reduce costs of transactions. So this is where we could also benefit from the digital space that is developed around activities. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'd like to bring it back, Kamal, to BRI and solutions. So do you see BRI as do you see BRI IMEC in response to BRI?
So there are two aspects here.
Yeah.
One is that IMEC, the geopolitical context in which it was conceived, there were some regional factors, like I mentioned previously. The Abrahamic Accords were an important catalyst for sort of pushing forward IMEC. And there is a larger global geopolitical context, which certainly BRI is part of. So there's no, in a sense, denying that at least in some of the players involved in IMEC,
Yeah.
if you look at the US, for the US, IMEC does, the promise of IMEC does include providing for an alternative to BRI. And that includes some of the other countries involved as well. But at the same time, I think BRI might have been a trigger or an accelerating factor. However, the natural sort of affinity of this region with respect to trade is there for all of us to see, right? In fact, yesterday we were at the Vastu Sangralaya, and we saw the amount of trade and economic interlinkages that existed between Europe and India. So when President Trump says that it is one of the greatest trade routes in history, he is right, because you see Roman coins being found in southern Indian states of Tamil Nadu and Kerala. This is a very organic corridor which has existed for millennia. So in a sense, it is only being revived through, of course, more modern geopolitical and economic imperatives. So to that extent, I think there might be some factors which have catalyzed it, which have accelerated it, but it's a very natural sort of a corridor that exists. Yeah.
So let's talk about the frameworks now. What
Yeah.
sort of frameworks, systems would be appropriate for IMEC?
No, I think if we look at the various challenges, those challenges become more pronounced if we imagine IMEC as a linear sort of a system. Whereas if we have a more networked approach to it, and perhaps that is the need of the hour, to not imagine IMEC as this straight line that joins Mumbai to Jebel Ali to Haifa to Piraeus in Greece. So instead of looking at it as a straight line, we have to have a more networked approach. So by that I mean, so Mumbai, it goes to Jebel Ali or Fujairah in UAE. That might there might be a rail link from there until through Saudi territory into Jordan and into Haifa, and then so on to 3 different possibilities in Europe. But also look at some other alternative routes. So have a networked approach where we don't have to necessarily look at it as a chain where if one link breaks, the whole thing breaks down, right? So that is the physical network network approach that we can take. The second thing I think is in terms of the domains. There is, like I said, physical goods, but there is also the digital dimension to it. Both hard and digital infrastructure and the softer harmonization that needs to happen with respect to standards, with respect to payment systems, with respect to coordination in logistics. Because if you're talking about goods changing hands, again, like a number of times, there has to be some kind of harmonization. And the third is the energy piece. Because Saudi and others, they have been, and the Gulf countries in the region do want to diversify, right? And this could provide for a pipeline like green hydrogen is part of the project as well, right? That is part of the imagination as well. So I think in terms of systems, we will have to move because the geopolitical context demands that we move from a linear approach to a more networked approach. Also, I want to emphasize that a lot of it, even though, I mean, we've talked about the political challenges to it, but which kind of basically says that, you know, this is a great idea, but because the political situation is not amenable, we might have to go slow on it, right? Whereas the other approach can be to take a more proactive approach and say, we can also demonstrate the utility of IMEC in catalyzing peace itself. So for example, there's this very important idea, I think, that has been floated, and I think there's good reason to push that. Can IMEC also become a corridor to transport humanitarian aid, right? In the Israel and Gaza context, because that can help us get a greater buy-in in the region, because that is something that countries in the region are looking forward to. That would make it easier for, let's say, policymakers in Riyadh or policymakers in Jordan to have a greater buy-in into the, or in terms of the optics of it, into the project. Because then what we are saying is, it's not sort of putting a wrapper of humanitarian aid around it. It is actually, demonstrating the dual use of the corridor. So it's not just about trade, it's not just about prosperity. It can also function as an important corridor for humanitarian aid, which is something that is very much welcomed and necessary in the current context that there is.
Right, that's really very interesting. And how should we be thinking about the Suez Canal, maritime choke points and energy routes in the future of corridor design?
I think when IMEC, sort of the idea came about, there was certain nervousness perhaps in Egypt, that because Egypt is home to the Suez Canal, and Egypt would had sort of some reservations about its own utility being sort of diminished. I think, but the current, because of the current geopolitical context, I think there is also, there is the very strong and a plausible possibility of also involving Egypt. There is something called IMEC Egypt, which also gives Egypt and makes Egypt a stakeholder in this corridor, right? And I think that's important because it is part of that networked approach that can be taken, so that Egypt also becomes part of the, becomes a piece in the larger puzzle. So to that extent, I mean, the Suez Canal is always going to be important. It's not going away. It will remain extremely important, but there can be alternative routes that involve Egypt itself. So they can be, if we have to sort of imagine the route, Mumbai to UAE and then UAE onwards, there is a rail link, and then that goes into Egypt, rather than Haifa. So, and both of these can coexist. We don't have to pit one against the other. I think they can coexist.
Okay, thank you. Curtis, we haven't really spoken about China, and I wanted to just ask you about what is the role of China as we think about.
Yeah, well, let me jump in. I mean, I'm mainly in Southeast Asia, where Southeast Asians are faced with this. We don't want to choose between the U.S. and China.
Right.
I hope IMEC doesn't become one. Oh, I don't want to choose between India and China. And it goes to the mindset behind why these things are being created. Ultimately, for me, I'm like, I remember when IMEC was announced, is it really real? And I'm generally the optimist, but to back up that optimism, I need real examples of where it works. So I was struck by, when you talked about the Seychelles, I'm focused often more on Southeast Asia, but I remember, I had the dates down, 1991, India launched the Look East policy. 2014, they launched the Act East policy. And then you will know best, did that turn into reality? I'm involved with a Thai company that's just launched in India. Great opportunity, but the reality of the India ASEAN Free Trade Agreement, the India-Thailand Free Trade Agreement, it's not completely clear. And it goes then to that it gets stuck in interpretations of the bureaucracy and regulation. This is the reality of the India-ASEAN, India-Thailand Free Trade Agreement. What will be the reality of IMEC? ultimately, Belt and Road Initiative, from my old days on the board of the Asian Development Bank, is an infrastructure play. And in infrastructure, money talks. And so rightly or wrongly, all these countries, including nearby Sri Lanka, signed deals. There's a famous port situation where then the Chinese took over the port. Chinese would say, well, they didn't pay back. Others will say, no, you tricked them. Again, it goes to what is the intent? But the reality is that money talks. So when I think about IMEC, where is the money coming from? I want to give a shout out, of course, to institutions here, like the National Stock Exchange. But the reality, India, from an outside perspective, also needs to think about how does it continue to open up, develop its capital markets to bring money in as well as bring money out. I'll just close with that one you had asked earlier about this notion of trust. Are these corridors about connectivity or rebuilding trust? They're so linked, But I was at another session. They're like, oh, how can we trust the U.S. anymore? Fair point. But remember, trust is two-sided. And I would say to you, so why does the U.S. now not trust a China or wherever? Is it because of deficits? Is it because of military actions? So what are the things on all sides of IMEC where they're going to have to trust each other? Because these countries don't always agree, even though we think they're in the same organization. Thus the split in ASEAN. Thus the split, I must say, even in SARC. But in the split of all these groups, look at NATO. How will IMEC address that? That's about the people-to-people relationship.
Thank you, Curtis. We have about 30 seconds left, and I want to bring in Michael for the final question. So why should we care about strategic corridors like IMEC?
As I was saying, from a small island state, we are affected and affected by whatever happens around us and globally, even on the other side of the world, impacts us. So we have no choice but to be interested and aware of what happens even in the IMEC. As Kumal has said, even the US, not being necessarily initially part of it, is now interested in this. And whilst the IMEC is passing along our shores, it definitely has significant implications and possibly opportunities that it may offer, but we are not necessarily involved or benefiting from it. So we would wish that we have a say or an opportunity to explore. Seychelles is limited in terms of resources, but is always willing to explore new opportunities. And IMEC may offer such opportunities even in the digital expanse. So yes, we have keen interest on that. Let me, as my last word, quote His Excellency Prime Minister Modi, and he says, "Let us invest together, innovate together, and grow together." I think that's the initiative there.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's a lovely sentiment to end on. So thank you. Thank you, panelists. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Angela, and thank you to our panelists as well. I'd like to request you all to please step forward. We'll have a quick photo op.